So back in 2019, a team of computer scientists ran this completely fascinating and honestly kind of unnerving experiment.
Oh, you're talking about the AI video game study.
Yeah, exactly. They took an artificial intelligence agent, dropped it into a complex, like three-dimensional video game environment, and basically just told it to play.
But there was a massive catch, right?
A huge catch.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't give the AI any rules. They didn't tell it how to win. They didn't program it to seek a high score.
They didn't even give it instructions on how to avoid dying.
Right. Nothing. Instead, they programmed it with only one single driving directive. Like they just told it to seek out situations it couldn't predict.
Which is wild. They mathematically programmed it to want to be surprised.
Exactly. And what happened next is, well, it's just crazy.
It completely upended the traditional models of how we understand motivation. I mean, driven entirely by this mathematically coded desire to resolve its own uncertainty. The AI didn't just wander aimlessly in digital circles.
No, it didn't just glitch out.
Right. It reliably and consistently learned highly complex, highly advantageous behaviors. Just by chasing the digital equivalent of a dopamine hit from the unknown, it figured out how to navigate the game.
It overcame obstacles and effectively, won the game.
It learned to survive purely because it was driven to understand its environment.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that right there is the core of our mission today.
We're taking a really massive stack of research today.
We really are. We're looking at Wikipedia's vast literature on the science of curiosity, encompassing developmental psychology, evolutionary biology, and neurochemistry.
Along with some incredibly fascinating supplemental readings on AI and scientific history.
And we are turning all of that inward. We're going on a deep dive into the architecture of curiosity. But the goal here isn't just to, marvel at how the brain works in some abstract way.
No, we want to extract the underlying mechanics.
Right. We want to figure out how to hack our own hardware to nurture an inquisitive mindset in your daily life.
Because, and I think this is crucial to establish right away, in an age of absolute relentless information overload, curiosity is no longer just a charming personality trait.
It's not just a cute quirk.
Exactly, or an academic luxury. It is your primary cognitive filter. It dictates not just what you pay attention to, but how effectively you adapt to a world that is shifting under your feet faster than at any point in human history.
It's a survival tool. And as we dig into these sources, the first question I had, and I think it's the question a lot of you listening probably have, is about the baseline. Like, is curiosity fixed?
Right, the old nature versus nurture debate.
Yeah, because society loves a fixed hardware model, right? We love to take a test, get a score, and say, well, I guess I'm just not a math person, or I'm just not naturally curious.
Does the science support that?
Exactly my question.
And the answer is not even slightly. If we look closely at the research on neuroplasticity and early development, the answer leans heavily, overwhelmingly, toward curiosity being a developmental moving target.
So it's more like a muscle.
It is entirely a biological muscle. We all possess it innately at birth, but it is a muscle that requires deliberate, intentional training, especially as we age.
It can be built up, or it can atrophy.
Yes, and it can be fundamentally altered by your environment.
Which is incredibly empowering. I mean, if you're listening to this and feeling stuck in a rut or feeling like your brain has just been on autopilot for the last 5 years, you haven't missed the boat.
You haven't. You just need to understand how the system operates so you can turn it back on.
So before we can hack the system, we need to define the parameters. Like, where does this drive actually come from?
Well, the linguistic roots actually give us a surprisingly accurate psychological starting point.
Oh, the Latin stuff from the source.
Yeah. The word itself comes from the Latin word curicitas, which is derived from curicis. That means careful or diligent.
Careful. Okay.
And that, in turn, is akin to cura, meaning care.
I love that distinction. It's not just a fleeting distraction. It's not a squirrel running past your window.
Precisely. The etymology implies a deep, motivated desire for information. It requires an investment of care toward the subject matter.
And in the biological literature, they frame this motivational desire through how organisms interact with their environment, right?
They do. Researchers divide this into two opposing behavioral drives. We have neophilia and neophobia.
Okay, so neophilia being the love of new things.
Correct. The active pursuit of novel stimuli.
And neophobia being the fear of the unknown.
Exactly. And neophilia isn't just a human phenomenon. Evolutionary biologists observe this across several highly adaptable species.
Like the corvids mentioned in the text.
Yes, your crows and ravens. or octopuses, dolphins, elephants, and certain primates. These animals actively pursue information they don't strictly need in that exact moment.
They bank it to adapt to their surroundings later.
Exactly. They are gathering intelligence just in case.
But the research points out a really stark transition that happens as organisms age, right? It seems like neophobia, that fear of the unknown, becomes the dominant operating system later in life.
It does, and there is a very brutal mathematical evolutionary logic to it.
How so?
Well, when an animal is young, the evolutionary imperative is, explore and learn so you can figure out how to survive. But once that animal has established a safe territory, identified toxic versus safe foods, and learned predator evasion, the math changes.
The risk-reward ratio flips.
Completely.
Yeah.
Taking risks to explore a strange new cave or investigate a weird sound becomes mathematically disadvantageous. The caloric cost and the mortal risk of making a mistake heavily outweigh the potential benefit of new information.
So neophobia sets in as a hardwired protective mechanism. You build walls.
Exactly.
It's exactly like a smartphone software update.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Think about it. When you get a brand new phone, the operating system is entirely focused on neophilia. It wants you to download new apps. It wants to absorb your Face ID, your fingerprints. It's constantly pinging servers for new features.
Right, it's hungry for data.
But as that phone gets 4 or 5 years old, the updates totally change priority. Apple or Android stop sending you fun new features.
The updates become purely about security and stability.
Yes. Patching vulnerabilities, building walls, that's neophobia taking over the hardware.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. We prioritize protection over expansion as our database of survival knowledge fills up.
But humans are a bit different, right?
We are. Human beings have a distinct layer of cognitive architecture that complicates this whole process. Psychologists draw a massive fundamental distinction between what they call perceptual curiosity and epistemic curiosity.
Okay, let's define those, because this seems crucial for understanding how we learn versus how, say, a dog learns.
Right. So perceptual curiosity is that innate, primal, exploratory behavior present in all those animals we just mentioned. It is an orienting response to a novel physical stimulus.
Like dropping something on the floor.
Exactly. If you drop a metal pan on the floor, your cat will exhibit perceptual curiosity. It will orient its ears, approach slowly, sniff the pan, determine it isn't a threat or food, and then walk away.
The curiosity is satisfied the moment the physical properties are assessed.
Precisely. Epistemic curiosity, on the other hand, is uniquely human. It is the drive for actual abstract knowledge and understanding.
So it's not just, what is this object?
No, it is the desire to know why the pan fell, what the pan is made of, and who invented the concept of smelting metal.
It's the difference between looking at the night sky and noticing the stars are shiny, which a dog can do, versus wanting to build a telescope to calculate their distance.
That's a perfect analogy.
And within this uniquely human epistemic curiosity, the research breaks it down even further into a framework that I think gives us our first real lever to pull today. They divide curiosity into a state versus a trait.
This is perhaps one of the most liberating concepts in developmental psychology. Curiosity is not a monolithic, unchanging attribute. It exists on two different timelines.
Okay, what's a state?
State curiosity is temporary, external, and highly situational. It is a fleeting itch. You might be walking to work and suddenly wonder why a particular piece of architecture includes gargoyles. That is state curiosity.
Well, trait curiosity is more of an identity.
Exactly. Trait curiosity describes a long-term, stable characteristic of an individual. It describes someone who inherently views learning as a lifestyle.
Like someone who consistently tries unfamiliar foods or travels to wildly different cultures and reads across multiple unrelated disciplines.
Right. They are just generally a curious person.
And here is where we can extract our first major realization for your daily life. If curiosity can be a temporary situational state, it means you do not have to overhaul your entire personality overnight to become a curious person.
No, not at all. You don't need to suddenly adopt the identity of a lifelong learner if that feels overwhelming. You just need to engineer the state.
You utilize the state as the wedge.
The literature suggests that curiosity is the urge that draws people out of their comfort zones, while fear and anxiety are the agents that keep them locked within those zones.
So if you purposefully induce state curiosity, you are actively counteracting neophobia.
Exactly. So practically speaking for the listener, the habit is to just step 1 inch outside your routine.
If you take the exact same route to work every single day, tomorrow, Take one different street.
Right. Or if you always read political thrillers, pick up one book on the history of botany. You use a very small, highly manageable situational trigger.
And by consistently engineering these tiny moments of state curiosity, you begin to retrain your brain's software to prioritize exploration again.
Over time, those engineered states naturally calcify into a personality trait. You are systematically proving to your nervous system that the unknown is safe, which slowly lowers the neophobic barrier.
Okay, so if we know we need to engineer these triggers, how do we actually do it? What is the mechanical lever in the human brain that creates the itch?
Because if we want to hack the system, we need to look at the source code.
Exactly. And the research points heavily to the work of a psychologist named Daniel Berlyne.
Daniel Berlyne was a foundational figure in the mid-20th century who rigorously categorized the exact stimuli that evoke human curiosity. He proposed 3 specific classes of variables.
The psychophysical, ecological, and collative variables, right?
Yes. Let's break those down, starting with psychophysical.
Okay, Yemi.
Psychophysical variables are the most basic. They correspond strictly to physical intensity. How incredibly loud is that siren? How blindingly bright is that light?
It is a raw sensory overload that demands your attention and forces an orienting response.
Exactly. Walking into a massive, booming nightclub with strobe lights is going to trigger psychophysical curiosity just by sheer force of input.
What about ecological?
Ecological variables relate to motivational significance and immediate task relevance. Does this stimulus matter to my immediate physical survival?
Or the specific goal I am trying to achieve right now?
Right. If you are lost in the woods and you hear a twig snap behind you, your curiosity about that sound is ecologically driven. It is highly relevant to your continued existence.
But the ones that are most relevant to us today, the ones we interact with when we are sitting at a desk trying to learn or trying to be creative, are the collative variables.
Collative variables are where human cognition gets truly sophisticated. They involve comparison. They require your brain to constantly, subconsciously compare different stimuli or features.
So comparing what you are perceiving right now against what you hold in your memory as expected reality.
Yes. Berlin identified several specific collative variables: novelty, complexity, uncertainty, conflict, change, surprisingness, and incongruity.
I want to focus on incongruity because I think it's the most powerful.
It is definitely a major driver.
To use a somewhat ridiculous analogy to make the mechanism clear, if you walk into your kitchen to get a glass of water and your refrigerator is humming quietly, your brain registers absolutely 0 collative variables.
Right, because the perceived reality perfectly matches the expected reality.
You are on autopilot. But if you walk into your kitchen and your refrigerator is aggressively playing a Beethoven symphony,
That would do it.
right, the incongruity is massive. The gap between what you expect a fridge to do and what it is actually doing is so wide that your brain violently snaps to attention. It demands to know what is happening.
And that demand to know, that absolute intolerance for the gap in logic, is exactly what birthed the psychological theories aiming to explain our drive.
Theorists needed to understand why the human mind possesses such a visceral need to rectify states of uncertainty.
And the first major model to emerge was the curiosity drive theory.
And this theory frames the entire concept of curiosity almost negatively, doesn't it?
It does. It frames it as a deficit. Curiosity drive theory posits that experiences of uncertainty, ambiguity, or cognitive dissonance are inherently undesirable.
They are fundamentally unpleasant psychological states.
According to this model, human beings deeply biologically desire coherence. We want our thought processes to be orderly and predictable.
When that coherence is disrupted by a collative variable, like the Beethoven fridge, it creates a highly unpleasant internal tension.
So the idea is that curiosity isn't this joyous, magical quest for knowledge. It's basically just psychological damage control.
We are gathering information purely to solve the mystery, close the gap, and restore our coherent thought processes so we can stop feeling stressed out.
Precisely. The literature compares it to basic homeostatic biological drives.
Like hunger.
Exactly. Just as a drop in blood sugar creates the unpleasant physical sensation of hunger, which drives you to eat, a drop in cognitive coherence creates the unpleasant psychological sensation of ambiguity, which drives you to learn.
Once you acquire the missing information, the drive subsides.
That's the theory.
I see the logic, but I have to play devil's advocate here because there is a glaring hole in this theory.
Let's hear it.
If ambiguity and uncertainty are so universally unpleasant and stressful, why do we actively seek them out?
The crossword puzzle paradox.
Exactly. If I am sitting safely on my couch on a Sunday afternoon, completely comfortable. Why do I deliberately pick up a crossword puzzle? Why do millions of people eagerly buy dense thriller novels or watch complex murder mysteries?
There is zero environmental ambiguity forcing us to do that.
Right, we are choosing the tension. Is the theory broken?
That exact critique is what forced psychologists to develop a more sophisticated model, which is the optimal arousal theory. This theory completely reframes the relationship between tension and pleasure.
Walk me through optimal arousal, because I think this is where the daily application really lives.
Optimal arousal theory suggests that the brain is not seeking a baseline of zero tension. Instead, organisms are constantly motivated to maintain a pleasurable, optimal level of arousal.
It is a highly calibrated balancing act.
It is. When you encounter a stimulus that has immense complexity or massive uncertainty, say, you are suddenly asked to give a presentation on a topic you know nothing about. Your arousal shoots up way past the optimal point.
You feel overstimulated, overwhelmed, and anxious.
Right. And to cope, you employ exploratory behavior to learn the material, master the topic, and bring your arousal back down to that comfortable optimal level.
Okay, that part tracks with the previous theory. You're reducing the bad stress. But what happens when the pendulum swings the other way? What if the environment is too safe?
If your environment lacks complexity, novelty, or challenge, your arousal drops below the optimal point. You become understimulated.
You feel lethargic. You experience boredom.
Yes. And in this depressed state, your brain actually craves tension. So you employ exploratory behavior to intentionally hunt for information, driving your arousal back up.
Berlin termed this specific hunting behavior diversive exploration.
Yeah, he did. Diversive exploration.
We literally invent puzzles to solve just to wake our nervous systems up. And this completely aligns with the third major theory the research covers, cognitive consistency theory.
Yes. Cognitive consistency theory operates on a similar axis, but focuses specifically on the size of the gap between expectation and reality.
It assumes that when two cognitive structures are logically inconsistent, arousal increases.
But the critical insight here is how we react based on the magnitude of that inconsistency.
Give me an example of the magnitude.
If the inconsistency is small and manageable, let's say your company rolls out a new software update that moves a few buttons around on your dashboard, your arousal goes up slightly.
It pushes you into that optimal zone.
Exactly. You use curiosity to click around, figure out the new layout, update your mental model, and resolve the inconsistency. But what happens if the inconsistency is massive?
Like if I walk into work and my entire department has been replaced by robots.
Exactly. If the gap between expected reality and perceived reality is too vast, the arousal spikes so violently that curiosity completely shuts down.
The brain abandons exploration and triggers raw survival instincts.
The literature notes that massive inconsistency often triggers fear, prompting a flight response to escape the environment, or aggression, prompting an attempt to forcefully alter reality to match your expectations.
It's the neophobia overriding the system. If the unknown is too big, we attack it or we run from it.
Which is why psychological safety is so crucial.
So if we map this entire psychological framework onto our daily routine, the actionable habit becomes incredibly clear. You have to actively manage your environment to stay in that Goldilocks zone of optimal arousal.
You have to become the architect of your own cognitive tension.
Yeah.
If you are feeling chronically apathetic or uninspired, your arousal is too low. You need to artificially introduce a manageable incongruity.
And crucially, this means we have to radically change our relationship with boredom.
Oh, absolutely.
Because in our hyper-connected modern world, the second our arousal drops below optimal, the second we feel a hint of boredom while waiting in line at the grocery store, what do?
We instantly pull out our phones.
We numb ourselves with passive scrolling. We artificially medicate the boredom with low-effort digital junk food.
Which completely short-circuits the brain's natural mechanism for diversive exploration.
Exactly. If you sit with that boredom, if you allow the arousal to drop, your brain will eventually panic and try to fix it naturally.
It will seek out what Berlin called symbolic activities, internally fueled mental processes.
You start thinking deeply. You start wondering about the mechanics of the world around you. You start engaging in epistemic exploration.
The habit here is profound but simple. Stop instantly curing your boredom.
Let it push you into the zone where your brain wants to hunt for meaningful information.
It is about giving your cognitive architecture the space to do what it evolved to do.
Okay, so we've mapped out the psychological theories. We know that ambiguity can drive us and optimal arousal balances us. But I want to pivot from the abstract psychology to the physical biology.
Down to the actual hardware.
Yes. What is actually happening inside the meat of your brain when you experience that visceral desire to learn something. How is the brain physically bribing us to get off the couch? Let's look at the neurobiology of the reward pathways.
This integration of neurobiology is where the modern science of curiosity really takes off. For decades, the psychological theories couldn't fully explain the physical intensity of motivation.
But then functional MRI technology came along.
Right. fMRI allowed us to map the neurobiological circuits of reward, wanting, and pleasure, and a much more comprehensive picture emerged. And the absolute star player in this biochemical ballet is dopamine.
Dopamine. Everyone knows it as the pleasure chemical, though I know it's vastly more complicated than that.
Vastly.
But the research provides a really fascinating nuance regarding how dopamine dictates curiosity. It isn't just a simple transaction of learn a fact, get a squirt of pleasure.
Not at all. The desire for new information utilizes the mesolimbic pathways of the brain. That's essentially a massive superhighway for dopamine transmission.
This pathway is how the brain evaluates the world, assigns value to stimuli, and interprets them as a reward.
But the critical nuance here is when the dopamine is released. Research demonstrates that significantly higher volumes of dopamine are released when the reward is unknown and the stimulus is unfamiliar.
Compared to when the reward is a known, familiar entity.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how the brain prioritizes the mystery.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around the mechanism here. Your brain gives you a larger chemical payout when you are actively anticipating the answer to a mystery, rather than when you are just reviewing facts you already know.
Precisely. Anticipation is a vastly more powerful neurological driver than the actual acquisition of the knowledge.
It's the slot machine effect.
Yeah.
You don't get the massive dopamine rush when the coins actually fall out. You get it while the wheels are spinning and you don't know the outcome yet.
The brain essentially pays you in advance to chase the unknown.
That is wild.
And it uses a highly coordinated sequence of physical structures to execute this chase. It is a beautifully complex relay race.
Let's walk through that sequence because the architecture is incredible. It starts with the nucleus accumbens, right?
Yes. The nucleus accumbens is a cluster of neurons deep in the basal forebrain, and it is the crucial ignition switch for the reward pathway.
When you encounter a novel stimulus, the nucleus accumbens releases dopamine to generate the feeling of wanting to investigate.
But crucially, the literature notes it also releases endogenous opioids.
Opioids, like the brain's natural painkillers and pleasure chemicals.
Exactly. While dopamine creates the craving or the wanting, the opioids create the sensation of liking the experience.
This dual release allows you to evaluate an unfamiliar, potentially scary situation and actually attach a positive, pleasurable value to the act of investigating it.
So you don't just feel compelled to look at the weird thing, you actively enjoy the process of looking at it. That's step one.
Then the signal moves to the caudate nucleus. What is happening mechanically there?
The caudate nucleus is a structure highly saturated with dopamine receptors. Its specific functional role in this circuit is anticipation.
So if the nucleus accumbens is the ignition switch, the caudate nucleus is the engine revving.
Exactly. It mentally models the potential reward of exploratory behavior before you even begin.
It's the part of your brain rubbing its hands together in excitement.
Yes. And finally, that anticipatory energy must be converted into action, which is coordinated by the striatum.
The striatum is a critical relay station that integrates the cognitive motivation with actual motor function.
It's the mechanism that physically commands your muscles to get you off the couch so you can walk over and examine whatever caught your attention.
It's a closed-loop system designed to make physical exploration utterly intoxicating.
It really is elegant.
But as I was reading through the stack of neurobiology sources, I hit a massive contradiction, or at least something that seems like a contradiction.
Oh.
Yeah, the text explicitly names another chemical that plays a vital role in this process: cortisol.
Ah, yes, I see why that seems contradictory.
Right, because cortisol is universally villainized as the stress hormone. Every health article talks about how chronic cortisol destroys your sleep, causes inflammation, and triggers anxiety.
It does all those things.
So why on earth is the brain using a highly corrosive stress chemical to encourage something as positive as curiosity?
It is a brilliant paradox, and it perfectly maps onto the optimal arousal theory we discussed earlier. The role of cortisol is completely dependent on dosage.
Dosage is key.
You are correct that a massive systemic dump of cortisol caused by severe trauma, paralyzing fear, or chronic anxiety will absolutely shut down the mesolimbic pathway.
It completely halts curiosity and initiates a rigid, neophobic survival response.
Your brain reroutes all resources to the amygdala to prepare for fight or flight.
Right, you aren't curious about the physics of a car engine if the car is currently hurtling towards you on the sidewalk.
Exactly. However, neurobiological studies demonstrate that the release of a microdose of cortisol, creating a very mild, manageable amount of physical stress, is actually required to initiate curious behavior.
So it provides the physical tension.
Yes. It is the biological manifestation of Berlin's collative variables. That tiny spike of cortisol creates the itch of the unknown,
It pushes your arousal level slightly out of the comfort zone.
creating just enough physiological discomfort to motivate the striatum to initiate movement to resolve the uncertainty.
It's the tension of a good mystery novel.
Hmm.
The author is deliberately pacing the plot to give you tiny, agonizing microdoses of cortisol.
It slightly stresses you out not knowing who the killer is.
And that mild stress, combined with the anticipatory dopamine from the caudate nucleus, makes it physically impossible to stop turning the pages.
That's exactly how it works.
That is staggering. And what's even more profound is how this chemical cocktail impacts the rest of the brain's functions. It doesn't just make learning fun. It fundamentally alters the physical structure of our memories.
Memory and curiosity are inextricably linked. The entire system falls apart without memory.
Think about the basic mechanics, right? To even determine if a stimulus is novel, incongruous, or surprising, your brain must be able to instantly access a database of past experiences to compare it against.
Right, if you have no memory of what a dog looks like, you can't be surprised by a dog in a tuxedo.
Exactly. The primary structure governing this database is the hippocampus, which is vital for the formation, consolidation, and recall of episodic memory.
The literature indicates that the hippocampus is deeply involved in generating the initial motivation to explore specifically for the purpose of learning.
And it works in tandem with the parahippocampal gyrus.
Yes, an area of gray matter that essentially acts as an amplifier for curiosity.
And this leads to a powerful synergistic loop, because a novel stimulus has that anticipatory dopamine attached to it and that mild cortisol edge. The hippocampus is basically bathed in a chemical signal that screams, "This is important. Do not forget this."
Consequently, the memories formed during a state of high curiosity are encoded vastly stronger and remain accessible much longer than information learned passively.
The sources cite a landmark 2009 fMRI study conducted by Kang and colleagues that vividly demonstrated this.
They gave the study a highly poetic yet scientifically accurate title, The Wick in the Candle of Learning.
They proved empirically that epistemic curiosity activates the reward circuitry in a way that directly and measurably enhances memory retention.
The wick in the candle of learning. That is such a perfect metaphor.
Curiosity is the wick. Without it, the wax, which is just raw, dry information, just sits there. It won't catch fire. It won't burn into long-term memory.
And this gives us a massive practical tool for how we work and study.
If we translate this neurobiology into a daily protocol, the application is incredibly straightforward.
When you need to retain complex information, whether you are reading a dense quarterly report for a board meeting or studying for an exam, do not just passively highlight the text.
Passive reading does not trigger the nucleus accumbens. It does not spike dopamine.
Because there is no anticipation, you have to artificially manufacture the mystery.
So, before you open the report, look at the title and force yourself to write down 3 specific, difficult questions you hope it answers.
Try to guess the final revenue numbers before you look at the data chart.
By intentionally creating a gap in your knowledge, you're manually engaging Berlin's collative variables. You trigger that mild cortisol stress of not knowing and the dopamine anticipation of finding out.
You are priming the hippocampus. You are essentially tricking your brain into viewing a boring spreadsheet as a valuable, hard-won survival reward.
It completely reframes how we should approach difficult tasks.
It's a game changer.
Okay, so if our hardware is this incredibly sophisticated, if we are biologically hardwired to reward curiosity with pleasure and superior memory, we have to address the elephant in the room.
The big question.
Why is the world full of incurious adults? If it feels this good to learn, why does the spark die? Let's look at the enemies of curiosity: aging, anxiety, and quite frankly, the way we structure education.
To understand the breakdown of a system, we have to observe the system functioning flawlessly, which happens in early childhood.
The renowned developmental psychologist Jean Piaget famously argued that babies and toddlers act as literal instinctual scientists.
They don't need to be taught the scientific method. They embody it. They are constantly trying to make sense of the physics of their reality.
They develop hypotheses, they conduct physical experiments, they observe the results, and they reassess.
Anyone who has ever watched a 2-year-old sitting in a high chair repeatedly dropping a spoon onto the floor knows exactly what this looks like.
They aren't trying to make you mad. They are conducting rigorous gravitational tests. They're testing the acoustic properties of the spoon hitting tile versus carpet.
The source text highlights a fascinating behavioral observation. A human toddler, if placed in a safe room, completely devoid of arousing stimuli, will not just sit there.
They will literally walk around, systematically searching the environment until they find anything interesting to engage with.
They are the ultimate biological engines of diversive exploration.
But the research also highlights a profound, almost tragic shift that occurs. And a lot of it points to how we socialize children in formal educational settings.
There is a powerful, sobering quote in the sources about this.
Right, it goes, "Children are born scientists. From the first ball they send flying to the ant they watch carry a crumb, children use science's tools, enthusiasm, hypotheses, tests, conclusions, to uncover the world's mysteries. But somehow students seem to lose what once came naturally."
Somehow they lose it. That is the crux of the issue. And the data strongly suggests that they lose it because the system often replaces the intrinsic joy of discovery with the extrinsic stress of standardized performance.
Which brings us to the ultimate, most corrosive enemy of curiosity.
Anxiety.
We talked earlier about how a microdose of cortisol is good, but chronic high-level anxiety completely destroys the mesolimbic pathway.
It paralyzes it. The sources detail a longitudinal study of 11-year-olds that examined the relationship between psychological state and exploratory behavior.
The findings were stark. Object curiosity was negatively related to psychological maladjustment.
Children who exhibited higher levels of anxiety in classroom settings engaged in significantly less curious behavior. Which makes perfect, heartbreaking sense. If a child is operating in a classroom where the culture is highly punitive, where they are terrified of getting the wrong answer or terrified of looking foolish in front of their peers, their arousal is constantly spiked way past the optimal zone.
Their brain is flooded with cortisol. They are not going to raise their hand to ask why, because asking why involves risk.
They are going to shrink down and prioritize absolute safety. Neophobia takes over.
And the long-term intellectual cost of that neophobia is staggering. Another major study referenced in the text looked at 568 high school students to measure the impact of these traits on actual academic output.
The researchers found that an aptitude for curiosity, when combined with motivation and creativity, accounted for a massive 33.1% variation in math scores and a 15.5% variation in science scores on standardized exams.
Oh wait, 33%. A third of the entire variance in high school math performance comes down to whether a student is curious and creative.
That is a gigantic statistical footprint.
If our educational environments or our parenting styles are crushing that trait out of them through anxiety, we aren't just making them bored. We are actively sabotaging their intellectual capacity.
We are suppressing their primary cognitive advantage. And this suppression doesn't stop in childhood. The sources note the sobering reality of how neurodegenerative diseases and psychological disorders violently impact the system in adults.
Right, because if curiosity relies on the hippocampus and the dopamine pathways, any disease that targets those structures will destroy the drive.
Precisely. Alzheimer's disease progressively degrades episodic memory. As we established, without memory, you cannot recognize novelty.
If you can't perceive the gap between expectation and reality, collative curiosity breaks down entirely.
Depression, similarly, exerts a devastating toll. It is clinically characterized by anhedonia, a lack of interest or pleasure in one's environment.
It fundamentally degrades the motivation and reward pathways in the striatum and nucleus accumbens.
In fact, the text posits that a sudden, distinct lack of perceptual curiosity for novel stimuli might actually serve as an early behavioral predictor for the onset of these exact illnesses.
Which means protecting our curiosity isn't just a productivity hack. It is a genuine fundamental metric of neurological health.
It is essential.
So how do we protect it in ourselves and others? The clear directive here is about environmental design. You have to aggressively lower the stakes.
Psychological safety is the prerequisite for curiosity. It simply cannot thrive in an environment defined by high fear, rigid conformity, or severe penalties for failure.
If you are managing a team at work and your management style demands absolute perfection on the first draft, nobody on your team is ever going to experiment with a new workflow.
They will stick to the safest, most inefficient known process to avoid your wrath.
You have to reward the process of inquiry, not just the final result. You have to vocalize your own ignorance and give yourself permission to ask the incredibly basic, dumb questions in meetings.
Lowering the stakes of failure is the only way to signal to the amygdala that it is safe to venture out into the unknown.
It requires a paradigm shift from proving what you already know to safely exploring what you don't.
Absolutely.
All right, up until this point, we have been discussing curiosity through a very wholesome lens.
We have.
We've talked about it as a positive academic virtue, toddlers dropping spoons, scientists studying stars. But the source material wades into some much darker, vastly more complex territory.
Yes, it does.
Curiosity has deeply ingrained survival functions that manifest in society, and even in our modern technology, in ways that are deeply uncomfortable. Let's talk about morbid curiosity.
Morbid curiosity is a universally recognized, yet frequently stigmatized psychological phenomenon. It is an intense, compulsive focus on death, severe violence, or events that cause profound physical or emotional harm.
It is the deeply uncomfortable, slightly shameful phenomenon of driving down the highway, seeing a horrific car crash on the other side of the median, and despite every rational part of your brain telling you to keep your eyes on the road, you tap the brakes.
You slow down, you stare.
Everyone does it, and almost everyone hates themselves for doing it. But it is ancient. The text cites Aristotle's Poetics, written thousands of years ago, where he explicitly noted, "We enjoy and admire paintings of objects that in themselves would annoy or disgust us."
Wait, what possible evolutionary or psychological benefit is there to staring at something gruesome?
It is a complex behavior with layers of motivation. It is certainly not a conscious desire to be traumatized or to experience sadness.
Evolutionary biologists offer a very pragmatic, almost cold explanation: threat simulation.
By observing the aftermath of life-threatening situations, we acquire vital survival data without having to take the physical risk ourselves.
Seeing the mangled car provides visceral data on the physics of a crash, which our neophobic systems absorb to ensure we don't make the same fatal error.
Okay, that makes sense on a primal level. It's a morbid data-gathering exercise. But what about the psychological or emotional angle? It can't just be about physics.
It isn't. Psychologists posit that as spectators of gruesome or tragic events, humans are often seeking a profound form of empathy.
We are trying to emotionally project ourselves into the victim's experience to understand suffering.
Conversely, true crime obsessions often stem from a desire to understand the mind of the perpetrator, an attempt to map out the darkest, most aberrant parts of human nature so they seem less unpredictable.
Science journalist Erika Engelhaupt, whose work is referenced in the supplemental reading, provides a brilliant conceptual framework for this. She argues that morbid curiosity relies heavily on meta-emotions.
Meta-emotions. Unpack that for me.
A meta-emotion is how you feel about your feelings. Engelhaupt suggests that we deliberately expose ourselves to difficult circumstances, like watching a horrifying documentary or staring at an accident, to trigger our own primary emotions of dread, fear, or sadness in a controlled environment.
We do this to set our minds at ease by reassuring ourselves that even the most chaotic, terrifying aspects of existence, even death, still follow the rules of the natural world.
Wow. We are basically using the extreme, tragic situations of others to calibrate our own emotional understanding of the world's boundaries. We are stress testing our own empathy.
That is incredibly profound.
And it naturally bleeds into another, slightly less dark category mentioned in the literature: social curiosity.
Social curiosity is the drive to acquire information about the behaviors, thoughts, and emotions of the people around us. It is the fundamental mechanism we use to navigate complex social hierarchies and interactions.
It's why gossip is a universal human constant. It's why we care deeply about office politics, or why reality television is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
We are constantly observing others to model social rules and figure out what behaviors are rewarded or punished by the tribe.
Precisely. Because we are a highly cooperative species, understanding the internal state of your neighbor is just as ecologically vital as understanding the weather.
But the research pushes the concept of curiosity even further. It moves past biology, past human sociology, and steps into the realm of purely synthetic cognition.
Which brings us back to the artificial intelligence study we opened the deep dive with.
Yes. The 2019 video game AI study. I want to circle back to this because I want to understand the exact mechanism. How do you program a machine which has no hippocampus and no dopamine to be curious?
In the realm of computer science, Curiosity has to be defined purely quantitatively. Researchers define it as the mathematical uncertainty an agent has in predicting the outcome of its own actions, given its current state.
The algorithm is designed to generate a reward signal, a mathematical equivalent of dopamine, only when it encounters a state that its internal model failed to predict.
So if the AI jumps in the game and expects to land on a platform, but instead it falls through a hidden trapdoor, the massive error in its prediction generates a huge reward signal.
It literally gets high on being wrong.
Exactly. And because it wants to maximize that reward signal, it constantly seeks out the edges of its own knowledge. It is driven entirely by intrinsic motivation to resolve its own uncertainty.
And the incredible result is that this pure, mathematically distilled curiosity was enough to allow the AI to master complex environments without any external instructions or predefined goals.
It learned how to survive purely by trying to minimize the gap between expectation and reality. And there's a quote in the supplemental reading that perfectly bridges this synthetic AI process back to how our human brain should optimally function.
It's from Gary Sticks in an article appropriately titled Wiki Curious.
He writes, "Curiosity actually works by connecting pieces of information, not just acquiring them.
That distinction is paramount.
It is the ultimate takeaway for how we synthesize knowledge. If you want to truly hack your curiosity, you have to model that behavior. You cannot act like a hard drive that just hoards disconnected facts.
You have to act like that algorithmic agent.
When you learn something new, say you read an article about the engineering of Roman aqueducts, don't just memorize the dates. Actively look for the connections.
Ask yourself, how does this fluid dynamics concept connect to modern city planning? How does it connect to the politics of resource management today?
Curiosity isn't a straight line of facts. It is a complex, interconnected web. When you build those connections, you aren't just memorizing data, you are updating your internal model to better predict and navigate the world.
Synthesis is the highest, most functional form of learning.
Okay, we have covered an immense, staggering amount of ground today. We have traversed the Latin origins of the word, mapped the neurobiology of a toddler, explored the evolutionary necessity of staring at a car crash, and watched an AI teach itself to exist.
It's been quite the journey.
Let's quickly synthesize the core habits we've unearthed today, weaving them together so you can start actively rewiring your approach to learning right now.
We can view these as sequential steps. First, rely on the state trigger. Recognize that neophobia is natural, but you can counteract it by stepping just slightly outside your routine to induce temporary situational curiosity.
Second, manage your Goldilocks zone. Do not instantly medicate your boredom with digital distractions. Sit with it to trigger diversive exploration and deliberately seek out small, manageable incongruities.
Third, utilize the mild challenge. Frame your learning as a mystery to be solved. Create active knowledge gaps before you read or study to leverage your dopamine pathways and prime your hippocampus for long-term retention.
Fourth, you must lower the stakes. Aggressively manage your environmental anxiety and the anxiety of those you lead, because fear is the ultimate biological killer of exploration.
And finally, be wiki-curious. Demand synthesis. Connect new information across radically different domains rather than just hoarding isolated data points.
Those are 5 incredibly potent, biologically grounded tools to optimize your cognitive hardware. But as we bring this deep dive to a close, there is one final piece of the source material that we haven't touched on yet.
And it moves us from the mechanics of the individual brain to a fascinating, almost philosophical question about the future of our entire society.
Yes, this insight comes from a book review included in our further reading stack. It's a review by David Oshinsky of a book by Thomas R. Seck, which chronicles the history of RNA research and the quest to unlock the deepest mechanisms of life.
And this historical text intersects with something incredibly recent and profoundly impactful: the development of the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines.
The review discusses how the mRNA vaccines represented a revolutionary, unprecedented leap in medical technology. For decades, the standard was to grow a virus in a lab, weaken it, and inject it.
The synthetic mRNA approach bypasses that entirely. It acts as a set of instructions, essentially teaching the body's own cells to manufacture a harmless fragment of the virus, turning the human body into its own highly efficient vaccine factory.
It was a triumph. But the success of this highly targeted approach has caused a massive seismic shift in how scientific funding and intellectual focus are distributed.
There is a massive pivot toward what the author terms disease-driven research.
Let's define that. Disease-driven research is highly pragmatic. We have a specific, urgent problem, A virus, a mutated protein, a failing organ, and we pour billions of dollars of funding into finding the exact scientific key to fix that specific lock.
It is goal-oriented practical learning. It is necessary and vital. But the text raises a profound concern.
Will this overwhelming, heavily funded focus on disease-driven research completely overshadow and defund the more traditional, open-ended, curiosity-driven research?
What scientists often refer to as blue skies research.
Blue skies research, investigating the natural world purely for the sake of understanding it without any clear, immediate, practical goal. It's the epistemic drive in its purest form.
Exactly. And the profound historical irony, the text points out, is that the incredibly targeted rapid development of the COVID-19 vaccines was only possible because of decades of open-ended blue skies, curiosity-driven research on RNA.
Scientists in the 70s and 80s weren't trying to cure a future pandemic. They were just tinkering with basic biology, driven by pure collative incongruity, to see how the code of life worked.
Without that foundational, unguided exploration, the highly targeted solutions wouldn't have existed when the global crisis actually hit.
And I want to turn that exact philosophical tension directly to you, the listener, for you to mull over as you go about your week, because this doesn't just apply to global scientific funding. It applies to how you manage your own brain.
Look closely at your own life.
Look at your reading habits, the things you choose to dive into, the way you approach your career. Are you only ever learning things to solve an immediate, pressing problem? Are you trapped in a relentless cycle of personal disease-driven learning, where you only seek out information to put out fires at work, fix a broken appliance, or optimize a specific metric?
Or are you actively, fiercely protecting space for blue skies curiosity?
Are you allowing yourself to explore the unknown, read a random book, or investigate a weird concept purely for the intrinsic joy of the reward pathway? Because if we only ever learn what we think we urgently need right now, we might never discover the profound tools and connections we're going to desperately need for the future.
It is a delicate, difficult balance to strike in a fast-paced world, but it is an absolutely crucial one for long-term growth and survival.
It really is. Remember, the diagnostic X-ray of your mind isn't a fixed image. It's a muscle, and you can change it. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today, and keep exploring.